I froze when I went to lunch with my children at the restaurant and found my wife with her lover. They were together, smiling, exchanging glances. I quickly told the children, "Go to the car now." When they left, I went to her table and said, "You just destroyed our family. I came to lunch with the children and saw this whole terrible scene. You will receive the divorce letter soon." She was desperate, and when the divorce letter arrived, she realized the mistake she had made, but by then, everything that existed between us had already dissolved like sugar in the boiling water of betrayal. I never imagined that a simple choice of restaurant on a Saturday afternoon could be the breaking point of my entire life. I never thought that one day, after everything we had built, I would become just an uncomfortable memory in the eyes of the woman I swore to love until the end. The woman who shared her bed, plans, body and dreams with me smiled at another man as if I had never existed, as if my presence in the world was an irrelevant detail, as if the memories we had built were just a worthless backdrop for the cheap show she was putting on with him. And even in the face of the absurdity of the scene, even with my heart breaking inside my chest, I had to maintain my posture, protect my children from that impact, swallow the urge to scream, to cry, to bang my fist on the table and ask why she did this to us. Why? Because love, when true, believes. It trusts. And sometimes, that trust is a cruel trap. I have never felt so deceived, so left behind by someone who promised to be by my side. When I handed over the divorce papers, it wasn't just a document, it was the death certificate of a story that I fought to keep alive. She didn't cry at the time. She tried to argue, she tried to minimize it, she tried to say that it was just a phase, a confusion, but there was no more room for confusion when I saw her gaze focused on another man. She had left me a long time ago, and I only realized it too late. It didn't hurt just because of the act, but because of the way it was done, the coldness with which she handled everything, the ability she had to lie while looking into my eyes for months, maybe years. While I thought our family was entering a more stable phase, she was already with both feet out. And the worst part, her smile with him wasn't that of someone who had made a mistake, it was that of someone who finally felt free. And that broke something inside of me that I thought would never break. But time has a curious way of treating us. It can be cruel in the wait, but it is also generous with those who endure pain with dignity. What began as one of the worst experiences of my life gradually became a process of reconstruction. Every day that I saw my children trying to understand what was happening, every time I looked in the mirror trying to find the man who existed before that moment in the restaurant, I realized that there was a long way back. Not for her, but for myself. To find my peace again. To understand that not all betrayals are shouted, some are silent, smiling, made up and well-dressed. And that even the most painful ones can be the key to a new phase in life. At first, I confess that I tried to understand. I tried to find some flaw in myself, some reason that would justify that emotional abandonment. But the truth is that, sometimes, people simply choose to leave their own story without warning. And no matter how hard you try, how much you give, how much you fight, there are those who prefer the ephemeral to the eternal. And she chose the ephemeral. What she didn't imagine, however, is that while she destroyed everything on impulse, I was reborn out of necessity. It wasn't easy. The nights were long, the silences heavy, the advice from friends empty, the hugs from my children, although warm, didn't heal. But time was shaping a new man. A man who learned to love himself without needing validation from those who discarded him. A man who understood that self-love is the first step towards any other type of love. A man who relearned to smile, first out of obligation, then out of habit, and finally, out of pleasure. And it was in this process, almost unintentionally, that another person appeared. Someone who not only looked at my wounds, but saw beyond them. Someone who didn't see me as a betrayed man, but as a man who survived. A woman who didn't need to compete with the past, because the present with her was light. Sincere. Simple. And it was at that point that everything changed. Because she, the woman who betrayed me, watched this reconstruction from afar. She tried to get closer with sweet words, with old memories, with promises that were no longer worth anything. But everything sounded empty. I was no longer the same. And that was when the moment that sealed everything came, the day my children walked in with the rings at my second wedding. The woman who destroyed me watched from inside a car, parked at a safe distance, believing that no one had noticed her presence. But someone did. One of our children. He looked directly at her, without resentment, without anger, without a smile. Just a discreet, dry nod. And she understood. She understood that she had lost much more than a husband. She had lost respect, trust, a place of belonging. Not because of the betrayal itself, but because of the choice to abandon what had value on a momentary impulse. While I exchanged heartfelt vows with someone who saw my soul, she cried alone in a car, seeing with her own eyes what she had thrown away. And it is at this moment that you understand that some losses are permanent. That no matter how much the person says they regret it, there are things that cannot be fixed. There are bridges that cannot be rebuilt. There are loves that, once torn, never have the same fabric again. And the greatest pain is not being betrayed. It is realizing that you gave your best to someone who chose the worst. But perhaps the true turning point in life is precisely this, not seeing the fall of the person who hurt you, but your own flight after everything. Because true forgiveness, the kind that sets you free, comes when you look back and realize that you would not go back. Not even if you could. But the most curious thing about all of this, is what happened that night, right after the wedding. A scene, an attitude, a gesture from her, something that no one expected. A last attempt? A belated desperation? Or something deeper, more human, more devastating? That, you're going to find out now. Welcome to the channel. Here, we do not support cheating under any circumstances. All the stories told are fictional, but the feelings are real, and the goal is clear, show how betrayal destroys lives, families and hearts. Get ready. What you're about to hear is a story strong, exciting and unforgettable. Take a deep breath, and hold on. Because what comes next will leave you in shock. Marcus was always a man of silent presence, the kind who didn't need to raise his voice to be respected. There was a calmness in his face that conveyed confidence, and in his gestures, a firmness that made others feel they could count on him. He was the kind of man who spoke looking you in the eye, who remembered dates, who knew the ideal temperature for his children's baths and the exact way to fold his wife's clothes so they wouldn't wrinkle. He wasn't perfect, because no one is, but he was constant. Someone I loved in every detail. In his care. In the routines that most people would let go unnoticed. From a very young age, he learned that love is not proven with words, but with daily actions, and it was with this logic that he built a family. He never imagined that the stability he felt could one day turn into doubt. His relationship with Camille began in a simple but intense way. She was outgoing, charming, with a laugh that seemed to fill any room. The first time they met was in a small bookstore, she in a sweatshirt and an improvised bun, leafing through a cookbook with a frown, and he with his eyes fixed on her before he even realized what he was doing. A comment about the book, an unpretentious conversation and, in a short time, they were having coffee on a random street corner, as if they had known each other for years. What began as a spontaneous exchange soon became something deeper. Marcus was the balance to Camille's impulsiveness, and she was the flame that warmed his more restrained days. They seemed to complete each other in the points where they differed. Building a life together was neither quick nor easy. They both came from different backgrounds, with family histories that left scars. Camille had grown up in an unstable home, where affection always seemed to be conditional on behavior. Marcus, on the other hand, came from a strict but honest upbringing, where everything was built with effort and loyalty. These differences sometimes caused friction, but they also brought them closer together. They learned to listen to each other, to give in, to negotiate spaces and silences. They spent years shaping each other with love, coexistence, and small concessions. When they decided to have children, they already knew that they were not just building a house, but a refuge, a home where they could both breathe in peace. The first child came as an avalanche of emotions. Camille cried during the ultrasound, Marcus held her hand with an expression of sweet disbelief, as if he were looking at a miracle. And, in a way, he was. The arrival of the second child strengthened the family bond even more, even with the daily chaos, the sleepless nights and the challenges of motherhood and fatherhood. The two took turns in responsibilities, shared tasks without complaining, laughed about the accumulated fatigue and found beauty even in the most ordinary moments, like Sunday breakfasts with poorly made pancakes and cartoons in the background. The house they lived in was simple but full of personality. Each room told a part of their story, the photos on the walls, the toys scattered across the living room floor, the notes left on the refrigerator, the children's height measurements written on the kitchen door frame. It was a portrait of a real life, imperfect but full of affection. The backyard was the family's favorite space, with a small wooden table, an old swing hanging from a tree and a barbecue grill that was often used on weekends. There, they created summer memories, laughed with neighbors, and had birthday parties with chocolate cake and colorful balloons. There, too, were silences that would later make sense. Marcus worked at a local cooperative, where he was seen as an example of ethics and commitment. He was not a man to flaunt his achievements, but rather to do his job with excellence. Camille, after a few years of dedicating herself exclusively to her children, had returned to the job market as an administrative coordinator at a cultural center in the city. This gave her a new routine, new friends, and a faster pace that contrasted with previous years. Marcus, in turn, encouraged, admired, and supported her. He saw in her eyes the sparkle of someone who was rediscovering forgotten parts of herself, and that made him happy. There was no jealousy, distrust, or fear, just pride. She deserved to experience this, and he wanted to be by her side in each new achievement. Weekends were still sacred to the family. Even with the busy week, they made sure to maintain traditions. Pizza nights on Fridays, board games on Saturday nights, walks in the park on Sundays. Small habits that seemed simple, but that formed the foundation of their shared life. The children grew up healthy, loving, intelligent, and there was always a feeling of gratitude in the air, as if everyone there knew that, despite the challenges, they were lucky to have each other. The communication between Marcus and Camille was something that many admired. They talked about everything, from the most everyday topics to the most profound matters. They had their disagreements, like every couple, but they knew how to resolve them with maturity. He knew her weaknesses, and she knew his. They were accomplices. On more introspective nights, they would sit on the porch with a glass of wine and reminisce about the past, make plans for the future, imagine where they would be in 10, 20 years. There was a lightness in these conversations that only exists when love is cultivated with truth. However, the routine, however comfortable it may be, sometimes hides small cracks. And they don't appear abruptly. They appear in the details. In the averted glances, in the automatic responses, in the kisses that are given out of obligation, in the hugs that last seconds less. Marcus, always attentive to the movements of the household, noticed that something in Camille had changed. She smiled less when he arrived home, took longer to shower, spent more time on her cell phone, and always seemed busy with something. But, instead of being suspicious, he attributed it all to tiredness, to the overload of work, to the pressures of the new routine. He didn't want to believe that there could be something more. Because when you love someone, you always give them the benefit of the doubt. Camille, on the other hand, seemed lost in thoughts she didn't share. There were nights when she would lie down and remain silent, staring at the ceiling, as if she were somewhere else. Marcus would ask her if everything was okay, and she would say yes, just tired. He believed her. Because he believed in her. And because he was tired too. They both were. Adult life, children, work, pressure, all of it took its toll. And even with the apparent harmony, there was something shifting, a kind of emotional distance that neither of them knew how to name. It was as if a thin cloud began to form between them, invisible but present. Still, they kept going. Their children continued to be the center of their lives. They were intelligent, curious, and loving. The older girl loved to draw and filled the house with pictures of characters she invented. The younger boy, who was passionate about dinosaurs, turned every corner of the house into a new archaeological expedition. Marcus was a present father, and so was Camille. If there was one thing they did well together, it was raising their children. They shared the tasks, made decisions together, and even when they disagreed about their upbringing, there was always respect. Their love for their children was the strongest bond between them. Perhaps the last, at that time. Close friends noticed some changes, but nothing alarming. They commented that Camille seemed more distant, that Marcus was quieter, but they attributed it to the pressures of everyday life. No one suspected that something could be wrong, and perhaps it wasn't, yet. Time has a peculiar way of turning absence into habit. And so their routine continued, with automatic smiles, quick kisses, and a slight tension in the air that neither of them dared to name. And then, that Saturday came. But, that's a story for later. Since that Saturday, something had subtly changed in the dynamics between Marcus and Camille, as if time had begun to mark the days with a new, silent and uncomfortable weight. The apparent normality of the following days masked a growing discomfort, an accumulation of unspoken feelings, an uneasiness almost invisible to others but deeply felt by him. Marcus would wake up with a tightness in his chest that he couldn't name, and every gesture his wife made, once so natural, now seemed to contain a hesitation that made him uneasy. The good mornings sounded less spontaneous, the kisses on departure less present, the laughter became less frequent, and the hugs shorter. There were no fights, no explosions, just a strange calm, the kind that precedes a storm. Camille started going out more often. Work meetings that went on beyond the scheduled time, cultural events that he had to attend, friends who showed up with last-minute invitations, commitments that seemed legitimate but that left Marcus feeling bitter. He tried to push away the intrusive thoughts, telling himself that it was natural, that it was just a phase, that she needed this space, that this was part of the maturation of any long-term relationship. She was in a different rhythm, and he, silently, followed as best he could. But even though her words were soft, his heart began to scream. And Camille's silence, so constant, began to echo louder than any argument. The children also seemed to notice the difference, even if they didn't understand it. The girl asked more often where her mother was, the boy showed more attachment to his father, as if seeking in him the balance that had previously been shared. Marcus began to cling to routines with his children as a way of keeping himself afloat. The mornings with cereal and milk, the homework after school, the bedtime stories, all of these became more than chores, they became shelter. What had once been lived as a couple was now sustained by him. And Camille, increasingly, seemed absent even when she was present. Small changes in her behavior began to intensify. Her phone was always on silent, it never sat on the table like before, and the notifications disappeared from the screen. When Marcus approached, she naturally turned the device face down. He understood, but didn't question it. He kept that image as if he were making a mental note of a detail that might be important later. He began to notice the new perfumes, the clothes she said she had received, the lunches with co-workers he had never met. And the more he tried to maintain his balance, the more he felt like he was holding up a structure that was collapsing at the edges. One day, when he got home early from work, he found the house silent. The children were with their grandmother, and Camille had left a note saying that she had gone to take care of things at the cultural center. He didn't think much of it until he noticed that her diary was open on the table. It wasn't like him to rummage through things, but that afternoon, something prompted him. And when he flipped through the pages, he found a note from a previous Saturday with the phrase, "Special lunch, don't forget." It wasn't anyone's birthday, there was no family event, nothing that would justify that description. He closed the diary slowly, trying to ignore the uncomfortable feeling that was growing in his stomach. In the following days, he looked more, spoke less. And the more he looked, the more he noticed that something was out of place. Camille continued to smile in photos with her children, still attended family dinners, still said she loved him when she went to bed. But her eyes betrayed an absence that he could not grasp. Marcus, on the other hand, began to live in a constant state of emotional alert. Everything seemed like a puzzle, a piece out of place, a different perfume, an untimely laugh, a subtle but constant physical distance. One night, while they were washing the dishes together, he tried to ask her carefully if she was okay, if there was anything she wanted to share, but Camille skillfully deflected him, as if she knew exactly what to avoid. She said it was just the accumulation of routine, that everything was fine, that he didn't need to worry. And he, once again, believed her. Because he still wanted to believe. But doubts, once planted, grow even when we try to ignore them. And then that weekend came. The kids had asked to go to the new restaurant in town, a themed place that was a hit on social media and that Camille said was always packed. Interestingly, she said she had already been there once with colleagues from work, for an event. Marcus remembered the phrase, special lunch, in the diary. That Saturday, she said she had to take care of something downtown and that it might take a while. He decided to go with the kids, thinking it would be a pleasant distraction. He parked the car, got out with the kids and entered the restaurant with the ease of someone who was just looking for a good time with the family. But it only took a few steps for everything to fall apart. Marcus's gaze was fixed on a table in the corner. It was like watching a movie scene in slow motion. Camille, with another man, sitting side by side, laughing, touching hands, exchanging glances that he knew all too well. That smile wasn't polite. It was intimate. That touch wasn't accidental. It was desire. That language between the two, although silent, screamed betrayal. Marcus stopped. His heart raced at a painful rate. His stomach churned. The children next to him, excited, asked if they could order dessert. It took him a few seconds to understand where he was, what he saw, what he felt. And then he acted. Calmly and firmly, he bent down, looked the children in the eye and asked them to go back to the car, that Dad needed to take care of something. They both obeyed, still not understanding. He watched them walk towards the exit and took a deep breath. She took the heaviest steps of her life toward that table. Every inch was an effort not to explode. Not because of hurt pride, but because of the destruction of what they had built together. When she stopped next to the table, Camille froze. The color in her face drained, her smile disappeared, her eyes widened. The man next to her tried to understand what was happening, but Marcus paid no attention. He just looked at her and said in a firm voice, without raising his tone, without creating a scene, "You have just destroyed our family. I came to lunch with the children and saw this whole terrible scene. You will receive the divorce letter soon." She stammered something, tried to explain, but his back was already turned, leaving the restaurant, his chest on fire and his soul in ruins. That night, he didn't sleep. He didn't cry. He just sat on the porch, staring into space, listening to the distant sound of his children's laughter upstairs. It was as if his mind was replaying the scene on a loop. The image of her smiling at another man, laughing like she used to laugh with him. The sound of her laughter mixed with the hubbub of the restaurant, her eyes meeting his for a second and filling with despair. Time seemed to have stopped at the exact moment everything fell apart. The betrayal wasn't just a physical act. It was a profound rupture with everything he believed was unbreakable. It was a breach of pact. A silent disregard for everything they had lived. And now, there was an invisible line that divided his life into before and after that table. And she knew. Camille knew what she had done. And more than that, I knew that I had just lost something that I might never find again. His gaze, steady and wounded, said it all. And as he went upstairs that night, he lay down next to his children, hugged them both tightly, and allowed himself to be silent. Because sometimes silence speaks louder than 1,000 words. But even in that darkness, there was still something unsaid. Something that she was hiding, that he didn't yet know, that would completely change the way he would view this betrayal. And that truth was about to emerge. Camille didn't respond to the divorce letter right away. She disappeared for 3 days. No message, no attempt to explain, no apology. Her silence was a kind of response that Marcus still couldn't decipher. When she finally returned to the house to get her things, she entered through the back door as if she were afraid to go through her own history. She was haggard, pale, carrying bags that trembled in her hands. She didn't find Marcus in the living room or the kitchen, so she went upstairs as if each step weighed a ton. The sound of his footsteps came from her youngest son's room, and she stopped in front of the half-open door for a few seconds, watching in silence. Marcus was sitting on the floor, surrounded by toy cars, with the boy sleeping on his lap. The light was low, and the silence of that scene cut deeper than any argument. When she approached, he didn't look at her. He just got up carefully, put his son to bed, and left the room without saying anything. In the living room, the meeting that could no longer be postponed finally happened. Camille sat on the edge of the sofa, avoiding his eyes. Marcus stood, arms crossed, shoulders tense, jaw clenched. The silence between them lasted an uncomfortable amount of time, until she took a deep breath and said she needed to tell him something. Marcus didn't answer. He just nodded, waiting. And it was at that moment that Camille began to cry. A choked cry, as if she had been holding back a pain for a long time that only now had the courage to release. She said she didn't know where to start, that she knew she had destroyed everything, that she didn't expect forgiveness, but that there was something he needed to know, something that might change everything. Marcus showed no emotion. He was there, but he seemed distant, as if he were listening to a story from another time, from another person. She looked at him with wet eyes and finally said that she hadn't gone to the restaurant by chance. It hadn't been a coincidence. It was a farewell. Not just to the man she was with, but to the double life she had been leading for the past few months. She said that after being confronted by Marcus at the restaurant, her lover had left her that same day. She said that she had never wanted anything serious, that she couldn't handle the weight of a woman with children, that it had all been too light to be real. Camille broke down. She said that she had believed his promises, that she had confused freedom with passion, that she had let herself be carried away by a type of validation that, for a long time, she had no longer found within herself. Marcus interrupted her at that point, his voice firm, saying that what she felt was no longer relevant. That choices had been made. And that each one of them had a consequence. Camille stood up. She went to her purse, took out an envelope, and handed it to him. It was a letter. She said she couldn't explain in words what needed to be said. Marcus hesitated before opening it, but then he looked into her eyes for the first time that night and noticed something different. A new fear. It wasn't the fear of losing his marriage, or facing judgment. It was the fear that by reading those words, he would never be able to look at her with any trace of humanity again. And yet, he opened it. He read it. And as his eyes traveled over the handwritten lines, the expressions on her face changed. First confusion, then anger, and finally, a deep silence. The paper trembled in his hands. In the letter, Camille confessed that the restaurant, the place where everything came to light, was no ordinary setting. It was the same restaurant where, years before, Marcus had declared that he wanted to grow old with her. It was where he proposed to her. Camille chose that place on purpose. She wanted Marcus to see it. She wanted him to catch her. She had planned that scene, consciously or unconsciously, as a way to break away from something she no longer knew how to escape. She said she was drowning in guilt, desire, shame, and that she needed to destroy the marriage with her own hands because she felt she no longer had space in it. But what Marcus didn't expect was what came next. At the end of the letter, she wrote a single sentence, "But that's not all I've destroyed. There's something you don't know, something I did before all this happened, and I need you to understand it before you can hate me completely." Marcus turned to her, demanding that she tell him what it was. Camille hesitated, sat down again, and with a trembling voice, said that the secret she was keeping was even more unforgivable. Years before, during a deep crisis in her marriage that Marcus hadn't even noticed, she had felt so lost, so disconnected from her own identity, that she had done something she hadn't told anyone about. At that time, she had sought answers outside the home, going on walks and therapies that were actually long conversations with someone from her past. An ex-boyfriend with whom she had never completely cut ties. She said that, during that period, for only one time, she had given in. And it was during that same time that she became pregnant with her youngest son. Marcus's world stopped. He looked at her as if he were a stranger. He asked if she was saying what he understood. Camille, crying, said that she had never been absolutely sure, but that there were doubts. He said that he had never taken a test, never wanted to know, because he was afraid of the answer. But that now, in light of everything that had happened, she could no longer hide. She said that the weight of that secret consumed her every day, that no matter how much she had chosen to carry on, she had never been able to erase from her mind the possibility that her youngest son was not Marcus's. And that, when she saw him being the most loving father in the world, the protector of that child, the man who never let anything be lacking, she felt that she was burying the truth alive. And that this betrayal, however absurd it seemed, had almost been a cry for help, a sick way of breaking free from the accumulated guilt. Marcus remained silent for a long time. Then he went to the kitchen, washed his face and stared at his reflection in the mirror. He felt the ground moving away from his feet, as if he were about to fall into a bottomless abyss. The pain of the recent betrayal was already overwhelming, but this was different. This was the deconstruction of his own paternity. The doubt about the blood. The doubt about the story. He went back to the living room, looked at Camille and asked, with a choked voice, if she wanted him to take the test. She said yes. That he had the right. That she could no longer bear to live with that lie, or half-truth, or whatever it was. And that if he decided to never look at her again, she would understand. He nodded. He said he would. But that, regardless of the result, the boy was his son. Because the love he had built with that child did not depend on biology. It depended on presence. On care. On bonding. But as for her, he didn't know if he could even remain in the same space. She tried to touch him. He backed away. He said he needed time. That he needed to think. That he could no longer be overwhelmed by new revelations. He said he was tired of lies, of half-confessions, of pain in installments. And that love, the one that once made him swear eternal promises, had become unrecognizable. Camille broke down. She tried to explain, to justify, but he didn't want to hear it anymore. She said the reason didn't matter. What mattered was what she had done. And that now, every word that came out of her mouth was an echo of a truth that took too long to be said. That night, Marcus left home aimlessly. He drove for hours, thinking about everything. The image of his children sleeping, the sound of Camille's laughter years ago, the weight of doubt, the pain of deception. He stopped the car on an empty road, got out and looked up at the sky. And there, alone, between the sound of the crickets and the cold dawn wind, he understood that his life would never be the same again. But he also understood that, even after everything, he was still the master of his choices. And that there was a next page to be written. Even if the previous one was stained. Even if he would never forget. Even if he would never forgive. Marcus didn't go home that night. He slept in his car, parked in a remote area of the city, facing a nearly still lake, reflecting the cloudy sky as if it were also waiting for an answer. The cold dawn passed through the windshield and cut through the silence with its own weight. He didn't cry. He didn't allow himself to anymore. He had already felt too much, and now he was just in suspension, as if the pain itself had refused to continue after everything he had heard. On the passenger seat, the envelope with Camille's letter still lay folded, crumpled by the trembling hands of the night before. At dawn, when the sun threatened to tear the horizon, he started the car and drove aimlessly. He needed space between himself and that house. He needed to feel whole again, or at least rescue the pieces that still made sense. Hours later, he pulled up to his sister's house, where he was greeted with wide-eyed surprise and silent arms of welcome. She didn't ask any questions, just hugged him long enough for him to know that this was a safe haven. The kids were at school, Camille hadn't texted him yet. His sister put coffee on the table, talked about the weather, about trivial things, as if she knew that Marcus couldn't handle any harsh words at that moment. He thanked her for the silence with a slight nod and then retreated to the guest room, where he closed the door, leaned against the wall and slowly sank to the floor. There, in the darkness, he finally allowed himself to feel. Not just the betrayal, but the shattering of everything he believed about himself. The doubt about his paternity was a gaping hole in his chest, but more than that, it was the certainty that the woman he had once chosen to share his life with had become a cruel enigma. He no longer knew where she began or ended. All he knew was that there was no going back. 2 days later, she returned to the house just to see her children. He asked Camille not to be there. She respected that. When he came in, the little ones ran into his arms with the purity of someone who is unaware of the emotional depths of adults. Marcus held them both tightly, kissed their heads and tried to smile. He read them stories, prepared their favorite snack, watched cartoons on TV, and when night fell, he said goodbye with vague promises that everything would soon go back to normal. But he knew that would not happen. Nothing would ever be the same again. In the car, before leaving, he looked out the window of the house. The light was on in the couple's bedroom. The curtain was half open. Camille's silhouette was sitting on the edge of the bed, her head down. What had once been their home now seemed like nothing more than a building full of displaced memories. It was time to decide what to do with what was left. The following week, he sought out a lawyer to formalize the legal separation. He wanted to resolve everything calmly, despite the emotional chaos that was still boiling inside. In the meantime, he began the process for the DNA test. Not out of revenge, but out of true necessity. He could no longer sustain the emptiness of that doubt. When the papers were delivered, Camille reacted with a mixture of fear and resignation. She didn't cry, she didn't try to dissuade him. She simply said that she would accept whatever came. That she understood. That, if necessary, she would sign everything. Her presence before Marcus was now made up of awkward silences and interrupted sentences. It was as if time itself had placed an invisible wall between them, and all that was left was the sound of what would never be said again. The following days were spent focusing on his children. Marcus tried hard to maintain his routine, tried to smile even when his throat was dry, answered questions with affection, even when his head wanted to scream. He didn't speak ill of his mother to the children. He didn't hold grudges in front of them. His dignity was his last armor. But inside him, there was a silent hurricane. Every memory of Camille was an open wound. Every gesture of his children, a reminder of what he could lose. And then, the day of the results arrived. He opened the envelope in his office. He was alone. His hands were shaking, but his eyes didn't waver. He read it slowly. And there it was. The scan confirmed that the boy was, in fact, his biological son. There was no longer any doubt. Marcus closed his eyes, leaned his head against the wall, and let out a heavy sigh. It wasn't immediate relief. It was something deeper, as if a part of him had come back into silence. He left the office, staring at the ground. He drove to an empty square, sat on a bench, and stared into space for an indeterminate amount of time. That didn't erase what Camille had done. It didn't make everything right. But it did eliminate a shadow. A cruel shadow that now left room for him to decide more clearly what to do with his life. That same night, Camille called. She said she had heard the result. She wanted to talk. Marcus agreed. They met in a discreet cafe, far from the noise of the city. She arrived first, with tired eyes and trembling hands. When he sat down, she tried to smile, but there was no more room for smiles between them. She said she was relieved, that she knew she would never be able to make up for what she had done, but that seeing Marcus so present in her children's lives made her understand even more the size of her mistake. He listened to her in silence. When she finished, he answered her in a low but firm voice. He said that what sustained him now was his love for his children, not the past he had shared with her. That he did not hate her. That he did not wish her any harm. But that there was no more us, no maybes, no new beginnings. He said that forgiveness was not a gateway, but a key for each of them to follow their path in peace. Camille didn't insist. She just lowered her head and said she understood. That she wanted him to be happy, even if it hurt. Marcus got up first. He paid the bill. He said goodbye without looking back. At that moment, something ended definitively. Not with an explosion. But with a strange calm. A maturity that had been forcibly torn from him. Back in the car, he turned on the radio and, for the first time in a long time, allowed himself to listen to music. Not as an escape. But as a small symbol of a new beginning. A few weeks passed. Marcus went back to some places he had previously avoided. He took his children to the park, to the movies, and met up with friends. Little by little, he began to realize that there was life beyond what had been lost. And it was on one of those afternoons, during a school activity, that he met Alana. She was a substitute teacher, new to the city, and the mother of a girl in his son's class. Their first contact was brief, but something about her naturalness, the way she spoke to her children, caught his attention. They exchanged a few words, then glances, then small smiles. Nothing forced. Nothing planned. Just the feeling that there was something there waiting to be discovered calmly. Their meetings became more frequent. Quick lunches, conversations during school events, exchanges of shy messages. Alana was different. She didn't ask questions that demanded immediate answers. She didn't force intimacy. But she listened deeply. Marcus, still suspicious of everything, gradually let himself be carried away. And what began as a friendship turned into something bigger. She met his children. She connected with them naturally. Not like someone trying to take up space, but like someone who understands the importance of each step. And when Marcus realized it, he was smiling lightly again. Camille, in turn, watched this reconstruction from afar. She saw her ex-husband resume his life with dignity. She saw her children smiling with a new woman. She saw what she had lost. And, in silence, she accepted it. Her pain was different now. No longer the pain of scandal, but the pain of real regret. The kind that doesn't ask for forgiveness. That just carries it. In a last attempt to show her regret, she wrote a diary for her children. Carefully, she gave it to Marcus. She said she didn't expect him to read it. She just wanted to keep it. So that one day, if they wanted, they could understand. Marcus didn't promise anything. He just kept it. Not for her. But for them. Months later, on a sunny afternoon, Marcus was walking with his children and Alana through a local fair. The children's laughter, the smell of food, the sounds of conversation, everything seemed lighter. A family friend saw him and said, "You look different, you look more whole." Marcus smiled. And in that smile, there was everything. There was pain, loss, overcoming, and above all, a new beginning. Behind a small flower bed, parked discreetly, was a car with tinted windows. Camille watched. She saw her children run into their father's arms, she saw the woman next to him smile tenderly. Her eyes filled, but she didn't get out of the car. She just stood there. Watching in silence what could have been hers forever. But now it was just the past. And then, the boy saw her. He didn't say anything. He just waved. No hate. No resentment. No smile. Just a simple, direct gesture. A wave that said it all. And in that moment, Camille understood that some losses are definitive. But she also understood that, in the end, each choice we make builds the road we will walk. And she, in the end, walked alone. Because there are wounds that heal with time. But there are others, that time only teaches us to carry. The boy's gesture that day, the restrained, silent, almost shy wave, became a kind of watershed between what Camille was still trying to hold with her bare hands and what had long since slipped through her fingers. There were no more words, no more confrontations, no more attempts at rapprochement. There was only the raw, throbbing awareness that nothing she did from then on would change the course of events. She, who had become so accustomed to having control, now walked on the uneven ground of consequence. She began to live in a small apartment, without much furniture, just enough. The bare walls seemed to echo her loneliness, and each object was chosen with an almost ceremonial care, as if she could rescue, in the details, a fragment of what she had lost. She never again tried to rebuild what she had with another man. Not for lack of opportunity, but because she understood, in the silence of sleepless nights, that there are losses that require mourning, not replacement. Marcus's life, in contrast, was reorganizing itself. Not without challenges, but with a kind of serenity that only time and integrity can restore. He and Alana had decided to move forward calmly, without immediate labels, without rushing to define what they were, but with a clarity of feelings that made each encounter more meaningful. She knew what he had been through, and never used it as a crutch to pressure him. On the contrary, it was in the silences that she supported him, in the pauses that she understood him. With her children, she was natural, never forcing closeness, respecting the spaces and memories that came before her. That made all the difference. Marcus felt free for the first time in a long time. Not only free from pain, but free from the weight of sustaining a relationship that no longer existed, free to be himself, with his wounds and his discoveries. On a random Saturday, during a school meeting, the coordinator announced an end-of-year project that would involve parents participating in a presentation open to the community. It would be something symbolic, to celebrate the importance of family presence in the development of children. Marcus was unsure about participating, not for lack of desire, but because of the complexity of the situation. He knew that Camille would probably be there. Even if there was a gulf between them, she was a mother. She would be present. He decided then that he would not run away. Not anymore. He had already run away from everything too much. Running away from discomfort, conflict, exposure. It was time to simply exist. Be a father, be there, be whole. Without fear of being seen, without fear of seeing. On the day of the event, she arrived with Alana and her children a little before the scheduled time. They were calm, smiling, and the school was full of families, cell phone cameras, children running through the hallways in ill-fitting costumes. When Camille arrived, alone, the almost imperceptible tension passed through the air like a dense breeze. Their eyes met, quickly. There was no smile. Just a silent acknowledgement of presence. She sat in the opposite row, holding a small gift wrapped in colorful paper. She wasn't there to make an impact, nor did she expect to be welcomed. She was there out of emotional obligation. The presentation began, and the children shone. They danced, recited poetry, sang out of tune, and each gesture was full of innocence. When the youngest son looked at his father, then at his mother, and smiled, Marcus felt a wave of emotions collide within his chest. After the event, there was a brief moment of fellowship in the courtyard. Camille approached cautiously and asked to speak in private. Alana understood the moment, moved away discreetly, and Marcus reluctantly agreed. They sat in a secluded corner, among potted plants and stacked chairs. Camille didn't talk about love, didn't ask for anything, didn't use guilt as a tool. She only said that she had read the diary she kept for her children, that she reread parts of it frequently, and that it made her understand more than she had ever understood before. She said she didn't want to erase the past, but she hoped that one day she could rebuild some kind of relationship, even if it was minimal, even as someone trustworthy in her children's lives. Marcus listened to everything without interrupting. Then he replied that he would not deny her the right to be a mother. That children were not rewards or punishments. That their love was not a bargaining chip. But that any rapprochement should happen with time, truth, and above all, with emotional responsibility. He said he still felt things he couldn't name, but that, to protect his children, he would learn to deal with each one of them. The conversation ended without hugs, promises, or reconciliations. Just a nod, and perhaps there, the first brick in what could become a new type of relationship, not as a couple, but as two adults who, despite having broken up, still share the responsibility of raising two little human beings. The following months became a kind of emotional laboratory for everyone involved. Marcus still carried memories that hurt, but no longer bled. Camille lived with regrets, but did not allow herself to be swallowed up by them. She gradually learned to be useful in other ways, to show affection without expecting an immediate return. And Alana, always firm, walked beside Marcus with the patience of someone who knows that time heals what haste destroys. One day, during a simple dinner at home, the eldest son asked if they could all spend Christmas together, like in the old days. The question fell like a stone in the silent room. Marcus looked at Alana, then at his daughter, who was now staring at him, waiting for a sincere answer. There was no hurt in the child's eyes. There was only longing. He took a deep breath and said he would talk to their mother. When he told Camille, she was silent for a few seconds, then said she would accept the invitation, if it were really true. And he replied that it no longer made sense to deny his children what they had once had, even if in a different way. So, on December 24th, the table was set for everyone. Camille arrived with a plate of dessert and a humble look on her face. Alana helped organize the cutlery while the children ran around the house with red hats and uncomplicated smiles. There was no tension. There was no open hurt. Just a peaceful night. Marcus and Camille talked about trivial things. Alana smiled with her children, told jokes. Gifts were exchanged, candles were lit. And for a rare moment, everyone there seemed just, human. Full of mistakes, successes, pains and attempts. That night, at the end of dinner, Marcus went out to breathe in the backyard. Alana approached. He pulled her close, kissed her forehead and told her he was grateful for every detail of her presence. She smiled, rested her head on his shoulder and replied that loving someone also means understanding the story that person carries. From the other side of the house, through the window, Camille watched. And for the first time in a long time, she felt no envy, no sadness, just a kind of silent acceptance. She knew she had lost something valuable, but she also knew that there was still time to become someone better. Maybe not for Marcus, but for herself, and for the children who were still waiting for her, with questions, with hurts, but also with love. As the evening drew to a close and the guests began to say their goodbyes, Camille grabbed her coat and approached Marcus. She handed him a small envelope. He said it was just a token gift. Inside was an old photo of them and their children, in a simple frame, and on the back was a handwritten message, not to remember what we were, but to honor what we created. Marcus read it, looked at her, and without saying anything, nodded. She left in silence. Alana came up behind her, hugged him from behind, and said, "This is just the beginning." And he, looking at the photo between his fingers, thought that maybe it really was. Not a new beginning with Camille. But a new beginning with life. With himself. And with everything that was yet to come. In the months following that Christmas Eve that had left silent marks on everyone involved, the paths of Marcus, Camille and Alana continued to reorganize themselves, like tectonic plates that finally found a resting point after years of instability. None of it was easy, nor should it have been. Marcus felt within himself a new phase being shaped from what was left, but now with less fear and more discernment. Alana's presence grew in his life with a lightness that contrasted with everything he had experienced up until then. She did not demand from him for feelings that were still settling, she did not pressure him to erase the scars, she simply made herself present, firm, sure of who she was, and, above all, sure of who he was, even in his most introspective moments. Marcus allowed himself more. Long conversations at the end of the day, short weekend trips, simple outings with his children. He was discovering a new way of loving, more mature, less idealized, more connected to reality. Camille, for her part, tried to maintain a constant but careful presence. Visits to the children were arranged in advance, the times were respected, and her words were always measured. She avoided any gesture that could sound like an attempt to win them back. She was fully aware that Marcus's love was no longer within her reach. But even so, she wanted, deep down, to rebuild a solid bridge between her and her children. It was in this effort that she now placed what little hope she had left. And, little by little, the children began to respond. The youngest, with more frequent hugs, the oldest, with more open conversations. They were hurt, yes, but not hardened. Children, even in the face of pain, have an amazing capacity for regeneration when they perceive sincere repentance coming from those who have failed. One afternoon, the oldest son asked his father to let him and his sister spend the entire weekend with their mother. It was a direct request, without hesitation. Marcus hesitated on the inside, but on the outside he remained calm. He said it was okay, that he trusted them. The truth was, he did trust them. The children. But there were still parts of him that shuddered at the thought of seeing them under Camille's care for entire days. Not out of fear that she would hurt them, but out of fear that somehow the past would repeat itself. Still, he knew that if he was to truly rebuild the foundation of the family he had left, he would have to allow other relationships to form outside of his control. When he delivered the children to Camille's apartment, her eyes were bright with excitement. There were flowers on the table, the smell of the children's favorite cake in the air, and an almost childlike eagerness in her voice. She thanked him genuinely, and Marcus simply said, "Enjoy the weekend." Then he turned and went on his way, without looking back. During those 2 days, Marcus traveled with Alana to a remote place, a cabin near the mountains, surrounded by tall trees and the constant sound of birds. It was there, amidst nature and the complicit silence that existed between them, that Alana finally opened up a part of herself that she had been carefully guarding. They sat by the fireplace, wine in hand, and she talked about her past with an abusive ex-husband, about the nights she cried in secret, about her daughter who grew up watching her mother fall apart and who, even at such a young age, she tried to comfort with hugs. He said that his decision to move to another city was an act of courage, but also of escape. He wanted a fresh start, but he carried the weight of what he had experienced, even now. Marcus listened to everything without interrupting. When she finished, he came closer, held her hands and said, "You are not alone. Not anymore." And it was the first time Alana cried in front of him. Not out of pain, but out of relief. Because she felt that there, finally, was solid ground. When they got home, the children were waiting at the gate, their faces lit up with the enthusiasm of those who had news to share. They talked about playing with their mother, about the movie they had watched until late, about the pancakes they had burned for breakfast. Marcus listened attentively, glancing at Camille, who was smiling with teary eyes. He didn't get too close. He simply maintained the posture of someone observing cautiously, but without hostility. And in that scene, something became clear: they were succeeding. Not like before. But in a new way, more conscious, more honest. A few weeks later, Marcus was called by the school for a one-on-one meeting with the principal. When he got there, he was informed that his youngest son had been acting more introspective in recent weeks, and that during a writing activity, he had written a text that caught the teacher's attention. The paper was handed to him, and Marcus read, in the words of a 7-year-old child, a confession that was both sweet and painful at the same time: "I have 2 homes. In one home, there's my father and my new mother. In the other, there's my old mother who cries sometimes. I like both homes, but I wish they could come together, because then no one would be sad." Marcus felt his world spin. Not out of guilt, but because he realized the emotional complexity that his children carried, even without understanding all the layers of what they were going through. That night, he gathered his children together and spoke calmly. He said he understood that everything was changing, and that even though his mother and father were no longer together, his love for them was the same. He assured them that no one would be sad because they loved everyone. That loving their mother did not hurt their father. That loving Alana did not mean betraying anyone. That families can have different shapes, but what matters is respect and care. Their eyes lit up. The oldest daughter said she wanted them all to have dinner together one day, just to play a crazy family that lives in two houses. Marcus laughed. And promised to think about it. And so, through continuous effort, the new structure took hold. Camille began to participate in some family events more frequently, always respecting the limits. Alana, in turn, never showed any discomfort, because she understood exactly where she was stepping. There was no competition. There was only a mutual understanding that the well-being of the children came before any pride. One night, after a school recital, they all went to dinner together. Not as a couple. Not as rivals. But as adults who had decided to grow with what was left. At the table, the children laughed, asked for dessert, spilled soda, and told exaggerated stories. And, for a moment, no one thought about betrayal, pain, or the past. They just lived in the present. It was in this context that Marcus began to think about the future in a more concrete way. He talked to Alana about the possibility of living together. Not immediately. But as a real plan. She responded calmly, saying that she would only accept if his children were comfortable, and that she would never enter a house where she was not completely welcome. He smiled. He said that was why he wanted her around. And so they began to prepare, together, a new home. Not a replacement for the old one, but a new page. With space for everyone, including the silences that still existed. Camille, upon hearing the news from her own children, did not react badly. She simply told them that they were growing up, and that now they would have another home to love. Afterwards, alone, she cried. But not out of jealousy. She cried because she truly understood that now there was an end. A definitive end. And at the same time, a beginning of something new. She called Marcus that same night. She thanked him. She told him that, despite everything, he was worthy. That he knew how to be a man. A father. And that she would always admire that. Marcus listened. And for the first time, he said sincerely, "I forgive you." And she cried again. But now in peace. The next morning, as he was taking his children to school, Marcus stopped in front of the new house under construction, with the little ones by his side. He showed them the floor plan, pointed out the garden, talked about the bedrooms, and the idea of a screened-in porch. The children were thrilled. And at that moment, he knew. He knew that he was finally at peace. That the story that began in pain was now being rewritten with maturity, respect, and love. Not the romantic love of the beginning, but the love that understands, that sustains, that transforms. And the story is not over yet. Because there is something in store for the last chapter. Something that will give the past the right weight, the present the deserved balance, and the future, the hope that no one expected. The new house was finished in mid-October, when the leaves were beginning to fall heavily and the wind brought a freshness of change that perfectly suited the moment. The structure was simple, but every corner had been carefully thought out, calmly, with the patience of someone who knows that a real home cannot be built with just concrete and wood, but with time, intention, and unspoken truths. Marcus followed each step with an almost ceremonial gaze, as if each wall erected erased part of the scars left by the past. The children had chosen their favorite colors for their bedrooms, Alana had suggested a reading space with armchairs and low bookshelves, and finally he just wanted a balcony from where he could watch the sunset with the one he loved, without rushing, without tension, just with the certainty that he was where he was supposed to be. On the day of the move, Camille helped with the children, organized the toys, separated the books, and labeled the boxes. She did this without intruding, without dramatizing, without making speeches. She simply did it with the dignity of someone who understood her place and knew that her responsibility was now different. She and Marcus talked naturally, like two acquaintances who share a past and an unnegotiable commitment to the well-being of their children. When everything was ready and the little ones were inside their new home, running between the rooms with the excitement of someone starting over, Camille looked at Marcus at the door, smiled with teary eyes, and said that this was a new chapter, that he deserved it. He replied that everyone deserved a little peace. And she agreed. They left without hugs, but with respect, the kind of respect that arises after everything has been undone, but still chooses not to destroy what is left. The relationship between Marcus and Alana was growing silently, without fanfare, but with ever-deepening roots. There was complicity in every look, partnership in every decision, care in small gestures. Alana's daughter had grown close to his children with surprising naturalness, and the three of them already treated each other like siblings who, despite not sharing the same blood, shared affection, games, and even the discreet jealousy of those who love each other. The new house was filled with different sounds, laughter, fights over the remote control, races for a place at the table. It was a living, human, real mess. And for Marcus, there was no more room for ghosts there. Every corner, every morning, every return from work became a reminder that he had overcome pain without becoming bitter. That he had overcome the greatest fall of his life without wanting revenge, without harboring grudges, without contaminating his children with emotional poison. One day, when he got home from work, he found a letter on his desk. It was from Camille. She had gotten a job offer in another state, an opportunity for personal and professional growth that had come after months of effort and training. She said that she had thought long and hard before accepting, that the new position would require her to move for a while, but that she still wanted to continue to be present in her children's lives in the best way possible. The letter was brief, direct, and straightforward, but every line carried the pain of saying goodbye. She said that she was not running away or hiding, but simply acknowledging that she needed to rebuild her own identity away from the scenario where everything had fallen apart. Marcus thought about it for days. He talked to his children, listened to their fears, calmed their hearts. He knew it would be an adjustment, but he also knew that Camille needed that move. When he said goodbye to her at the airport, he took the children with him. There were tears, tight hugs, promises of video calls. And when she boarded the plane, he felt a strange kind of lightness. It wasn't relief. It was understanding. Alana, observing everything closely, never demanded a place, title, or dominance. She was present, solid, self-assured. She knew that loving someone with a history required respect for the pain that came before. And she knew, above all, that true love is built in the everyday. When Marcus, months later, decided to ask her to marry him, he did so on an ordinary afternoon, barefoot on the living room floor, while she folded clothes and laughed at something her daughter had said. There was no diamond ring, no rehearsed speech. Just a sincere proposal, accompanied by a look full of the future. And she, with teary eyes and the most beautiful smile he had ever seen, said yes. The children cheered, her friends celebrated, and life, for the first time in a long time, seemed to have found real harmony. The wedding was simple, in the garden of the new house. Only the closest people were present, flowers picked that morning, tables decorated with drawings made by the children. There was no ostentation, but there was something more valuable, truth. Camille participated from a distance, sending a handwritten letter that was read aloud. She said that she was rooting for them, that she wanted her children to grow up in a home where love was an example, not just talk. She said that she had learned from her mistakes, and that she was still learning. And she thanked them for never denying her place as a mother, even when she herself had lost it due to her actions. The letter moved everyone. Marcus put it in a red envelope and put it in the box where the family's important memories were kept. Because for him, forgiving was never about forgetting. It was about recognizing, accepting, and moving on. Years passed. The children grew up, changed schools, made new friends, and matured with a rare lucidity. The eldest son became a sensitive, questioning, and fair teenager. The daughter found a universe in books that helped her understand the complexities of the world. Alana's daughter became their confidant, and together they formed a family nucleus that, although unconventional, was solid, loving, and honest. At a birthday dinner, as teenagers, the three of them wrote letters to their parents, delivered with shining eyes and open hearts. In his son's letter, Marcus read, "I know everything that happened. I saw it. And even though I didn't understand it all at the time, I felt it. But what you did after that, that taught me more than any lesson at school. You showed me that it's possible to be strong without being cruel, that it's possible to love again without erasing what came before. Thank you for never giving up on us." He held the letter for long minutes. He said nothing. He just cried silently. Because there, in that boy's words, was the greatest recognition he could receive. Camille also found new paths. In another city, with new connections, she was able to start her life over with more autonomy, far from the eyes that always associated her with mistakes. She built new relationships, discovered talents that she had ignored, and made sure to maintain a consistent relationship with her children, even from a distance. Video calls became constant, visits during vacations were full of meaning. She never tried to recover what was lost. But she knew how to preserve what could still be cultivated. And over time, the respect she lost was rebuilt with actions. You didn't go back to the past. But you became a better person for the present. And so, each piece of the puzzle found its place. Nothing was the same again, but everything gained new meaning. Marcus, sitting on the porch of his house, with Alana by his side and his children talking in the background, looked at the sky and thought about how life has a brutal and surprising way of teaching us to love in a more mature way. It was no longer the idealized love, without flaws. It was the love that is built on the ground of real life. With pain, with difficult choices, with losses that teach and scars that tell stories. And perhaps, for that very reason, it was even more true. Now I want to know from you, what did you think of this story? What part touched your heart the most? Leave your comment, tell me your opinion, because it is very important. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, take advantage now and subscribe, turn on notifications and leave a like to strengthen this work. And here's a thought, betrayal doesn't just destroy relationships. It destroys trust, erases stories, fragments families, and leaves a deep mark on those who were not to blame for anything. A selfish choice can have lasting consequences, and even the most sincere regret doesn't have the power to erase what was done. This channel does not support, encourage or romanticize any type of betrayal. Here, we show the consequences, the pain and, most importantly, the importance of acting responsibly and truthfully in relationships. Until the next story. And remember, true love does not hurt, does not hide and does not betray.